Her life became a vivid example of how fragile human existence is and how quickly everything can fall apart. Lauren was a beautiful soul with expressive green eyes. She had an unwavering belief in the goodness and sincerity of people. However, it was her very trusting nature and openness that led to the young woman's untimely demise. Lauren Heike was born in November 1993 in Seattle, Washington. She grew up in a well-off family. Her father, Jeff, owned a plumbing business, while her mother, Lana, worked in real estate. Lauren had a very warm relationship with her older brother, Ryan. Lauren moved to Phoenix and enrolled in the Gary Manuel Aveda Institute, where she studied to become a cosmetologist and skincare specialist. The young woman always took meticulous care of her appearance and had an excellent understanding of cosmetics, so her education helped her develop her natural talents. Lauren began her career at the age of 18 and quickly achieved success. At first, she worked as a customer support representative. From 2015 to 2020, she held the position of a leading manager at the well-known cosmetics company Benefit. Then, for 9 months, she worked as a cosmetologist in a beauty salon. In October 2020, she took a job as a manager at the Center for Aesthetic Medicine. In addition, Lauren planned to follow in her mother's footsteps and try her hand at real estate. At the time of the tragedy, she was working full-time as an instructor at a golf club. Lauren was never afraid of challenges, was remarkably responsible, and easily found common ground with people. She actively developed her skills in the beauty industry, sports, and real estate. The young woman diligently watched her physical fitness, regularly visiting the gym and generally leading a healthy lifestyle. Lauren had a wide circle of friends and a loving family that always supported her. In her free time, the young woman engaged in beneficial activities. In addition to work, sports, and meeting up with friends, she loved traveling and hiking. It was her love for scenic trails that made Lauren fall in love with Phoenix. The young woman often took solitary walks, listening to music on her headphones and enjoying nature, fresh air, tranquility, and peace. Her favorite route was a trail in the northern part of the city, not far from her own apartment. There was hardly ever anyone there. Naturally, Lauren's parents were very concerned about her solitary wanderings through deserted places, but Lauren herself was convinced of her safety. Every morning, she thanked fate for another day lived and boldly set out on a walk. As her loved ones recounted, Lauren had a distinctive morning ritual. Upon waking up, she would drink coffee, chat with family and friends, and then go for a walk. The young woman did this every day, believing that such a start guaranteed a positive mood for the whole day. Unfortunately, she had no idea that her trusting nature and carelessness could play a fatal role. On April 28, 2023, everything began as usual. Lauren drank her coffee, talked on the phone with her loved ones, and then went for her usual walk in the northern district of Phoenix, not far from her home. Her route passed through a picturesque trail in a quiet, sparsely populated area. The one-way journey took 15-30 minutes. The young woman left home around 10:30 a.m. The last time security cameras captured Lauren was at 10:52 a.m. The footage shows her walking carefree along the park path. The beautiful young woman was dressed in a pink sports top, black leggings, and sneakers. She only had her phone and keys with her. No one ever saw her alive again. Lauren was supposed to show up for work at 11:30 a.m., but she neither arrived nor notified anyone about being late or absent. This was uncharacteristic for the extremely responsible young woman. Colleagues tried to call her several times, but to no avail. Lauren's phone was turned off. Worried friends inundated each other with messages on instant messengers, hoping to find out if anyone knew about the young woman's whereabouts. But no one knew anything, as she had not been seen after leaving home that morning. Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Lauren's anxious parents, who also could not reach her, drove to their daughter's apartment. They hoped that the young woman was just feeling unwell and therefore did not go to work. However, she was not at home either, although all her things remained in place. The doors were locked, with no signs of a struggle or robbery. It seemed as if Lauren had gone for a walk and simply not returned. Without wasting a minute, the family filed a missing person report with the police. Law enforcement officers immediately began a search, but it did not yield quick results. That day, April 28, it was sunny and warm in Phoenix, as always. Unfortunately, there were hardly any people in the park where Lauren was walking. If someone had been passing by during the attack, perhaps the tragedy could have been avoided. But this did not happen. Lauren was last seen alone on her way to the park, after which the young woman disappeared and did not answer calls. All day, law enforcement officers and concerned citizens actively combed the surrounding area and park in search of any traces of the missing woman. They looked under every bush, checked every corner, and questioned everyone they met. But all efforts were in vain. Lauren's family nurtured the hope that perhaps the young woman had simply gotten lost, been delayed by some business, or spontaneously gone to visit friends in another area of the city. They incessantly called her, sent messages. But there was still no news of Lauren's whereabouts. With each passing hour, hope faded and fear for the young woman's life grew. Her parents, brother, and friends were beside themselves with anxiety and despair. It all resembled a nightmare. But the next morning, April 29, around 11 a.m., the worst happened. Lauren's body was accidentally discovered by a passerby, a woman walking her dog nearby. She immediately recognized the young woman, as she often walked this route. Just by the trail, in the bushes, the dog sensed something horrifying. Upon approaching closer, the woman saw Lauren's bloody body. Without wasting a second, she called the police. Law enforcement officers promptly arrived at the scene. A terrible sight unfolded before their eyes. Lauren's lifeless body lay just 3 meters from the trail in the thicket. It was covered in numerous stab wounds. The young woman lay on her back, her arms limply spread, her clothes torn and blood-stained. Everything around was drenched in blood. Forensic experts immediately set to work. According to preliminary conclusions, death occurred on April 28 around 11 a.m. from blood loss caused by deep stab wounds. The body had 15 wounds, most likely inflicted with a folding knife.
The wound in the back area was fatal. The nature of the injuries indicated that the attack and murder lasted for some time. The wounds were located in different parts of the body, with varying depths and shapes. The injuries on the young woman's hands indicated her desperate resistance. Deep cuts on both sides of her palms evidently appeared when Lauren tried to grab the knife blade, deflecting it
From herself. The police realized that the young woman had fought for her life until the very end. But the attacker turned out to be remarkably strong and aggressive. The attack took the victim completely by surprise. Scratches on her back, shoulders, and torn clothing allowed them to assume that the criminal had crept up from behind, knocked Lauren off her feet, and begun inflicting stab wounds. Then he turned the young woman onto her back and continued his bloody rampage. At the crime scene, a clear footprint of a sneaker, size 42-43, was found, presumably the attacker's footwear. A thorough examination of the surrounding area showed that during the violent altercation, Lauren had desperately tried to save herself. She crawled, tried to hide in the bushes, but to no avail. Bloody trails stretched for several meters from the young woman's body, testifying to her final and so unequal struggle. The poor girl called for help with her last ounce of strength, but unfortunately, at that early hour in the deserted park, no one was nearby. A few meters from the site of the tragedy, another testament to Lauren's desperate desire to survive, was found a fence with barbed wire, which she had apparently frantically tried to climb over. On the sharpened edges of the wire, pieces of torn fabric and traces of blood remained. Experts suggested that the numerous abrasions and scratches on the young woman's body appeared precisely during the attempt to overcome this obstacle. Nearby, Lauren's personal belongings were found: her phone and apartment keys. Evidently, they had fallen out of her clothing pockets during the fight with the attacker. But neither a wallet nor other valuables were found on the deceased. This immediately allowed them to rule out the version of a murder committed for the purpose of robbery. The young woman's mobile phone was broken. The last incoming and outgoing calls were dated the evening of April 27. That is, for almost a day and a half, there had been no news from Lauren.
Further thorough examination of the area allowed forensic experts to come across another important find. Among the branches not far from the body lay a bloody folding knife, the probable murder weapon. The blade and handle of the knife were covered in fingerprints and other DNA traces belonging to an unknown man. Fragments of hair and epithelial cells that could have come from the killer were also seized at the crime scene.
The body of the deceased and all the discovered physical evidence were urgently sent for examination. In parallel, investigators began carefully studying the footage from surveillance cameras. Fortunately, one of them captured Lauren entering the park at 10:52 a.m. The young woman was alone, wearing headphones, listening to music. Nothing suspicious was noticed, but literally a minute later, the silhouette of a tall, slender man in dark clothing flashed across the recording. He ran very quickly past the camera as if trying to hide his face. Despite this, experts managed to discern that it was a young African-American man wearing a baseball cap,
His height, build, skin color, and clothing elements all matched the description of the person whose traces were found at the crime scene. Another camera located near the park exit captured the same man literally flying out from around the corner, looking around at 10:59 am. Then he tries with all his might to climb over the fence, but his clothes get caught on the spikes. In the end, the perpetrator simply jumps over the fence, loses his cap in the process, and disappears in an unknown direction as fast as his legs can carry him. These video recordings became the first glimmer of hope for the investigators, and although the identity of the criminal had not yet been established, law enforcement now had a clear description and identifying characteristics of the person to be found. Interestingly, the time of the mysterious man's appearance in the park, according to preliminary expert conclusions, almost exactly coincided with the time of Lauren's murder. That is, the cameras captured the probable killer immediately before committing the crime and right after it. A thorough analysis of the video recordings, a frame-by-frame examination of each second, revealed several more important details. First, the suspect moved in an extremely purposeful and fast manner, constantly looking around as if afraid of being noticed. Second, he appeared in the park literally half a minute after Lauren, apparently following her. And after committing the crime, the perpetrator rushed to flee, away from the park entrance, climbing over the fence in order to disappear from the scene as quickly as possible. All this confirmed the theory that the murder was intentional, planned, and quite possibly far from the first on the perpetrator's track record. He acted quickly, brazenly, skillfully covering his tracks. And yet, in the heat of the escape, he made a few unfortunate mistakes that allowed the cameras to capture him, at least partially. The surveillance camera footage was immediately shown to Lauren's relatives and friends. Unfortunately, none of them could recognize anyone familiar in the man in the frames. Of course, everyone was stunned and deeply saddened by this tragedy. The family could not believe that someone could deliberately, with particular cruelty, take the life of their kind, bright girl. Lauren had no enemies or conflicts, no debts to her name. No valuables or large sums of cash were found on her. She did not lead a risky lifestyle. Therefore, the versions of murder for personal reasons or for mercenary purposes had to be discarded. A week after the tragic events, a press conference was held, at which representatives of law enforcement agencies spoke. They informed the public about all the evidence found and asked for help in identifying the suspect. Lauren's father, barely holding back tears, begged everyone who had any information to report it to the police. Relatives set a substantial monetary reward for information that would allow them to track down the killer. Lauren's story shook the entire city. Thousands of concerned citizens responded to the call. People spread information on social networks, organized search groups, and volunteered. In parallel, painstaking work with physical evidence continued. DNA traces, fingerprints, and other biological materials were thoroughly studied in a specialized laboratory. The persistence of the experts finally bore fruit. The genetic profile of the suspects matched the data contained in the police database. The system issued a name Zion William Teasley, a 22-year-old African-American who had several prior convictions. Detectives immediately set about studying the identity of the possible criminal. It turned out that Zion was raised in a dysfunctional family. His parents abused alcohol and drugs. The young man's problems with the law began in childhood thefts, hooligan antics, threats. In 2020, he was convicted of a series of armed robberies. After serving almost a year behind bars, Zion was released early for good behavior. He was last arrested in January 2023 for an assault with a knife on a random passerby. But then the victim withdrew the statement, so Teasley got off with a suspended sentence. At the time of Lauren's death, Zion was under the supervision of law enforcement and had to regularly check in at the police station. He last appeared for the mandatory check on April 27, the day before the tragedy in the park. Armed with this information, the detectives began to devise a plan to apprehend the suspect. Round-the-clock surveillance was established on Teasley.
It soon became known that at that time, he was not working anywhere and practically never left home, only rarely visiting a store or meeting with some dubious characters. Having obtained an arrest warrant, the operatives went to Zion's apartment. They had to break down the door, but there was no one inside. During a thorough search, the police came across a bucket with bleach, rubber gloves, and rags. It seemed that the suspect was trying to destroy all traces of his involvement in the crime. Fortunately, he did not have time to complete the task. In Teasley's room, they found a suitcase hastily stuffed with clothes. Right there lay a brand new passport in someone else's name and bus tickets to Canada. It appeared that the young man was planning to flee the country in the near future. Investigators suggested that Zion had learned about the search and decided to hide from justice. A large-scale special operation was launched. Orientations on Zion Teasley were sent to all states. The Border Service was warned about the need to detain the murder suspect. Patrols were on duty at train stations, airports, and major highways. Detectives carefully tracked calls from the fugitive's phone, determining his location by cellular tower signals. At the same time, investigators did not stop gathering evidence. They managed to find several witnesses who had seen Zion Teasley stalking Lauren on the eve of her death. One woman noticed him loitering near the young woman's entrance, as if waiting for her. Another man had seen the suspect in the same park a couple of days before the tragedy. A thorough study of Zion's past showed that this was far from the first case of his attacks on members of the weaker sex. A month before Lauren's murder, Teasley was detained for harassing some patron of a nightclub. And even earlier, a girl he was dating had filed a statement about being beaten by him. However, the case was closed at the time due to lack of evidence. By all indications, Zion was an extremely unbalanced, aggressive type. He openly despised women, considering them inferior beings. His posts were found on social networks where he called them the worst words. And also on the suspect's pages, they discovered photos with knives very similar to the murder weapon. Investigators made the assumption that Lauren had likely become a random victim of a maniac. Zion may have seen her on the street, followed her, and then attacked her in a secluded place. It's possible that something about the girl provoked his morbid aggression, her attractive appearance, carefree attitude, headphones in her ears. Experts say that types like Teasley sometimes perceive female vulnerability as a trigger for attack. Lauren's relatives were shocked by the brutality and senselessness of the crime. They couldn't believe that someone was capable of so inhumanly taking their daughter's life just because she went for a walk. The girl's father made an impassioned public appeal. He urged everyone to refrain from any attempts at vigilante justice and allow the police to act within the law to punish the perpetrator. Finally, 3 days after the manhunt was announced, Zion Teasley was apprehended. He was hiding in a dilapidated garage on the outskirts of the city. During the arrest, he resisted fiercely, managing to wound one of the police officers. During interrogation, the suspect behaved defiantly. At first, he claimed to have nothing to do with the crime and that it was the first time he had ever seen the deceased girl. Then he began denying his very presence in the park that day, and when shown the surveillance camera footage, he abruptly fell silent and demanded a lawyer. The prosecutor promptly charged Zion Teasley with formal charges of intentional murder and kidnapping. Among the weighty evidence were surveillance recordings, Lauren's personal belongings found in the suspect's garage, the murder weapon, DNA traces and fingerprints found at the crime scene. The court ruled on a pre-trial detention measure without the possibility of bail. The trial of Zion Teasley began on June 5, 2023. It was one of the most high-profile crimes in the state's history. The entire country closely followed the proceedings. Crowds of reporters, activists, and ordinary citizens thronged outside the courthouse. Everyone wanted to see in person the person who committed such a heinous murder. Zion was brought into the courtroom in handcuffs under heavy escort. He wore an orange prison jumpsuit, and an indifferent expression was frozen on his face. In contrast, Lauren's loved ones did not restrain their emotions. Her mother wept inconsolably. Her father cast angry glances at the defendant. Friends of the deceased were also present in the courtroom, holding her photographs. In his opening statement, the prosecutor made every effort to convince the jury that Zion Teasley was a cruel and cynical killer who posed a significant threat to society. He placed particular emphasis on the audacious nature of the crime and the numerous pieces of evidence that testified against the defendant. According to the prosecutor, Zion was a psychopath who harbored hatred toward women and derived pleasure from inflicting pain on them. Teasley's defense attorney, for his part, tried to prove his client's innocence. He called into question the evidence provided, suggesting that someone else could have been Lauren's killer. The defender urged the jury not to succumb to emotions and public pressure, but to be guided solely by the facts. He also mentioned Zion's difficult childhood and the abuse he had suffered at the hands of his closest relatives. At present, Zion William Teasley has been charged with first-degree intentional homicide. In December 2023, the Maricopa County Prosecutor's Office filed a motion to seek the death penalty against the defendant, as prescribed by Arizona state law for particularly serious crimes. the Phoenix Police Department officially announced the completion of the investigation and the transfer of the case materials to court for prosecution of the suspect. There is currently no information to indicate that the attack on Lauren Heike was anything other than a random victim selection by the perpetrator. Zion Teasley himself continues to deny any involvement in this brutal murder. He remains in custody without bail. The trial is scheduled for October 2025. It is expected to be one of the most high-profile trials in Arizona history. The tragic death of Lauren Heike has stunned all of America, truly shocking her family and friends. A young woman who so loved life and believed in goodness was killed by a brutal murderer for absolutely no reason. This crime has once again reminded society of the importance of public safety and timely response to troubling signs of disturbed behavior in individuals. Lauren's story has also demonstrated how crucial coordinated work by law enforcement is. It was thanks to the prompt and professional actions of the police that they were able to quickly get on the trail of the suspect, apprehend him, and collect substantial evidence of guilt. Ahead lies the high-profile trial of this case, which is set to put a final period and determine the punishment for the killer. Society hopes for a fair sentence and the most severe punishment for the perpetrator. But most importantly, the bright memory of Lauren Heike must live on in the hearts of all who knew and loved this wonderful girl. She will forever remain young, beautiful, kind, and sincere. Do you know that every 2 minutes in the USA, a woman dies from violence? Now you are looking at a photo of a real psychopath who heartlessly took the lives of 2 wonderful women. Christine Melton was killed in her sleep. He simply strangled her with his bare hands and tried to dispose of her body like trash. Diana Ruiz, a mother of 2, was brutally crushed by a car, turning her into a bloody pulp. And he did it with pleasure, boasting about the details of his atrocities. Christine Melton was a beauty with blonde hair, a bright smile, and a kind heart. At 35, she radiated the joy of life and shared it generously with everyone around her. Born in Illinois, Christine had shown a bright creative nature from an early age. She was passionate about painting, dancing, singing, and dreamed of becoming a famous actress someday. However, it was not a star-studded career, but the simple earthly joys that became the meaning of her life. In school, she befriended Stephanie, with whom she carried her friendship through the years. The girls shared common dreams and aspirations to find their happiness. In search of a better fate, they moved together to sunny Cape Coral in Florida, where they got jobs as waitresses at Duffy's Bar. Christine adored her job, as it allowed her to communicate with people daily and share the warmth of her heart. Relatives remember Christine as a true ray of sunshine that warmed everyone around her. She was a loving daughter, sister, friend, and was called the favorite aunt for her nephews, whom Christine paid a lot of attention to. This girl genuinely cared for her close ones and was always ready to help. No wonder she was considered the glue that held her large family together. Christine had numerous talents and hobbies. She painted beautifully, creating picturesque landscapes that adorned her friends' homes. Christine also loved to travel, especially to the mountains and beaches. This passion for travel attracted her to new places and adventures. Even in ordinary days, Christine found a reason for laughter and fun, as she had a crazy sense of humor. Her jokes were always apt and witty, which made her beloved in companies. But Christine's greatest treasure was her loyalty and ability to love sincerely. In all her relationships, friendly or romantic, she gave herself completely. She was a reliable friend who cherished friendships for years. Christine also dreamed of meeting her true love, getting married, and building a strong family. Her heart was full of tenderness and compassion for everyone around. Christine became passionate about aesthetics and dreamed of opening her own beauty salon. She attended courses in makeup and manicure, perfecting her skills. In her free time, Christine loved to experiment with her appearance, trying bold looks. Despite her love for fun, deep down, Christine remained a quiet and modest girl. She did not seek to be the center of attention and felt comfortable in a friendly circle. Christine valued trustful conversations and was genuinely interested in people's lives. This combination of external attractiveness, inner beauty, and bright energy attracted people to her. 43-year-old Diana Ruiz was the embodiment of maternal love, care, and devotion to her family. This slender woman with long dark hair and a gentle smile dedicated her life to her 2 most precious people, her teenage daughter and 5-year-old son. They were the meaning of her existence, for whom Diana spared no effort, time, or emotional warmth. Diana was born and raised in Cape Coral in a friendly Cuban family. From an early age, she was surrounded by her parents' love, who instilled in her the values of cohesion, mutual assistance, and the joy of communication. The girl grew up active and sociable, easily made friends, and was the soul of companies. At the same time, Diana showed considerable responsibility and determination, dreaming of a worthy education and profession. Fate granted Diana true feminine happiness, 2 wonderful children, and a loving husband. Her daughter inherited her mother's beauty and gentle nature, while her son her zest for life and spontaneity. Diana was proud of her little ones above all and made every effort to raise them as worthy people. She supported them in all their endeavors, rejoiced at every success, and consoled them in troubles. For her daughter, Diana was the best friend and advisor, and for her son, the most caring and wisest mom in the world. To ensure a decent future for her children, Diana worked hard. For the last 5 years, she was a constant bartender at the local Moose Lodge Club, which became her second home. She adored her job because it allowed her to communicate with many people daily, give them a good mood, and get charged with positivity from them. Colleagues and visitors fondly remembered her friendliness, wit, and ability to find common ground with everyone. Soon another bright page appeared in Diana's life, a meeting with her beloved husband Scott. Genuine feelings, filled with tenderness, care, and laughter, flared up between them. Scott was captivated by Diana's beauty, wisdom, and soulfulness, while she saw in him a reliable life partner. The lovers planned to get married and build a cozy family nest where love and harmony would reign. Diana dreamed of growing old with Scott in this charming city, holding hands and rejoicing in the successes of their children and grandchildren. But despite her happy personal life, the core of Diana's existence remained her children. Her daughter was just finishing school and preparing for college, and Diana tirelessly worked to give her the opportunity to obtain the desired education. She wanted her smart girl to reach heights and realize her potential fully. Diana also strived to spend more time with her son while he was still very small, travel together, discover the world, and build trusting relationships. For these 2 little hearts, Mom was the center of the universe. In her free time, Diana was passionate about handicrafts, knitting, embroidering, weaving with beads. Her products were full of love and warmth, which the woman generously shared with her relatives. Diana also cooked wonderfully. Her signature Cuban dishes were the highlight of all festive feasts. With special joy, she gathered a large family together to enjoy heartfelt communication and shower everyone with care and tenderness. Diana's radiant smile never left her face, as she was sincerely grateful for every lived day. Even in sorrow and hardship, this courageous woman did not despair but radiated hope and faith in the better. Her bright look and encouraging words were healing medicine for everyone who needed consolation and support. Wade Wilson was born around 1994 in a troubled family of teenagers. His biological parents were too young and immature to raise a child, so they gave Wade up for adoption to a couple from their church, Candy and Steve Wilson, who had 2 other daughters. The adopted son grew up problematic, and from a young age, he began breaking the law. Since 2010, Wade had been arrested over 20 times for theft, fraud, hooliganism, assaults. He repeatedly served terms in prison, including more than 3 months shortly before the October murders. In relationships with women, Wade also showed cruelty. He beat, raped, and threatened to kill. His ex-girlfriends described him as a monster capable of pretending to be a nice guy, only to then torment them. 6 months before the tragedy, Wade reunited with 23-year-old Melissa Montanez, who endured his beatings and betrayals. Even when he was in prison, Melissa waited for him and gave him new chances. The girl hoped that his assurances of love, excuses for aggression with drugs, and mental disorders were sincere. But soon she realized that behind the attractive mask lay an emptiness, and that her life was in danger. Wade's father, Stephen, tried to maintain a relationship with him after the adoption, despite the problems with the law. He gave his son money, neglecting his own needs. It was to him that Wade turned, fleeing from the police and asking for money for a ticket. It was to him that he described his horrific crimes with strange delight. But even the father's years of devotion could not keep him from the horror of the monster his son had become. Stephen performed his civic duty by turning Wade into the police to protect others from harm. The decisive event for the bloody incidents was October 6, 2019. That Sunday evening, Wade Wilson had fun with his girlfriend Melissa at the Buddha Bar. A quarrel erupted between them over Wade's intention to visit someone's home. Melissa categorically refused to do this. Enraged, Wade went to Melissa's car supposedly for his things, but instead he got behind the wheel and fled, leaving his girlfriend. Melissa spent the night at a friend's house, and in the morning she discovered 8 missed calls from an unknown number, which belonged to Christine Melton. As it turned out, it was with Christine that Wade had met at the same Buddha bar. The young couple quickly bonded over mutual sympathy and left the establishment together with Christine's friends. They continued the fun at the home of their new acquaintance, Jason, where passion flared between Wade and Christine. When the company dispersed in the early morning, Christine's friend Stephanie was calm to leave her with Wade, as she felt no alarming signs, and Christine herself assured that everything was fine. Wade, however, took advantage of the helpless sleeping girl to strangle her, wrap her in a sheet, and try to discreetly carry her out. But the stiff corpse proved too heavy, so the murderer simply left it in the house, stole the victim's phone and car, and disappeared. He immediately used the phone to quarrel with Melissa. The next victim of Wade was 43-year-old Diana Ruiz. She was simply walking to her morning shift at Moose Lodge when Wilson picked her up, pretending to be lost. As soon as Diana got into the car, he immediately attacked her, strangling her on the move. Then, in a deserted place, he dragged the still-living woman from the car and ran her over several times until her body was turned into a bloody pulp. Leaving the mutilated remains in the bushes, the killer calmly drove off to meet Melissa to beat her again. His confidence and impunity were striking in the midst of the attack on his girlfriend. He boasted to another acquaintance that he killed people at night. As soon as Melissa escaped, he got into Christine's stolen car and fled, leading the police on a chase. Obviously, the criminal acted impulsively under the influence of anger and excitement, not thinking about the consequences. He did not hide traces, did not dispose of the murder tools, and boasted about what he had done. Perhaps drug intoxication dulled his fear of punishment. Or maybe the thirst for violence simply clouded his mind and prompted him to kill again and again. No wonder one of his ex-girlfriends warned that Wade would eventually kill someone if he wasn't stopped. Unfortunately, they only stopped the monster after he had taken 2 priceless lives. Wilson returned to Cape Coral and headed straight to his girlfriend Melissa. At that time, she was at Mayo Spa Salon, where Wade rushed at 8:45 am. Melissa didn't recognize the car he was driving. It was the grey Hellcat stolen from the murdered Christine. Enraged, Wade immediately started a scandal, demanding that Melissa get into the car. She refused, so Wade began forcibly dragging her into the salon. Crazed, Wilson was so eager to attack his girlfriend that he forgot to put the car in park. It rolled forward and hit another vehicle. Then he jumped out and with insane fury attacked Melissa. Despite her desperate resistance, the burly Wade quickly overpowered the delicate girl. He punched her in the face until blood flowed, bit her ear, grabbed her throat, and pinned her against the wall, threatening to kill her. And all this took place in broad daylight in front of people. Fortunately, passers-by intervened. Someone called the police. This allowed Melissa to escape from the clutches of the sadist. She ran away, leaving the attacker with nothing. Then the crazed Wilson jumped back into the stolen Hellcat and fled. An ambulance took Melissa, bruised, with abrasions and a split lip, away. The shocked girl could only think about living until her son's 15th birthday, which she hadn't even managed to congratulate him on yet. Fleeing pursuit, Wilson arrived at his acquaintance businessman Josh's place. He rushed to him in the office in despair, begging for money for a ticket out of town. Puzzled, Josh refused him. Then the crazed Wade blurted out, "You don't understand. Josh, I killed people yesterday." Stunned, the owner called the police, while Wilson hid somewhere in the backyard. Sometime later, Wade broke into the house of a couple who had just left town. Finding himself safe, he called his biological father Stephen and again began begging for help. This time, he told his father everything without concealment, how he strangled the sleeping Christine, calling her a bitch, how he picked up Diana, strangled her right behind the wheel, and then ran her over to make her into a cutlet. And he recounted all this with notes of delight and bravado in his voice, as if he was proud of his atrocities. Stephen was shocked by these horrific revelations. At first, he wanted to protect his son from punishment, but eventually realized that Wade was no longer the child he loved. The murderer had already caused harm and was ready to destroy further, so Stephen made a difficult but correct decision to turn Wade into the police before he could mutilate other lives. With a heavy heart, the father found out where his son was hiding and directed the authorities there under the pretext of calling a taxi. The police caught Wilson by surprise, and after half an hour of persuasion, finally took him into custody. On the morning of October 7th, soon after Wade Wilson's attack on Melissa Montanez, Fort Myers police went to the scene of the incident at Mayo Spa Salon. There they found the beaten Melissa, who detailed the attack by her ex and indicated that he had fled in a black Nissan Versa. The victim also told about the history of violence and drug addiction of Wade and expressed her fears that if he had managed to drag her into the car, he would have definitely killed her. According to her, he repeatedly threatened to execute her during the attack. Parallel to this, the Cape Coral police received a call about a suspicious death of 35-year-old Christine Melton in her house on Tudor Drive. At the scene, they found the body of the strangled woman and a sheet tied with her own clothes, as well as signs of a struggle and the disappearance of the victim's car. The gruesome discovery prompted the cops to classify the case as a murder. During her testimony, Wade's ex Melissa recalled that in the morning, he called her from a number that belonged to some Christine Melton from Cape Coral. This clue led investigators to suspect a connection between the attack on Melissa and the murder of Christine. While some law enforcement officers searched for traces of Wade Wilson, others set about establishing his identity by questioning acquaintances and relatives. Soon, the biological father of the suspect, Stephen Testiska, came forward. He reported that he had received several alarming calls from his son, who confessed to killing 2 people and begged for help to escape. At the insistence of the police, Stephen found out Wade's whereabouts and directed a squad there, assuring his son that he had ordered him a taxi. So around 10 p.m., Wilson was caught in a stranger's house, where he had broken in, hiding from the chase. At first, the criminal refused to surrender, but after half an hour of negotiations, he finally opened the door and ended up in handcuffs. The day after the arrest, Melissa Montanez informed investigators that Wade had called her from prison with declarations of love, but at the same time confessed to the murders of Christine Melton and Diana Ruiz. He detailed how he strangled both women with his bare hands because he just felt like it, while high. This moment of enlightenment finally convinced Melissa that Wade was a dangerous monster, skillfully manipulating emotions and pretending to be innocent. Meanwhile, Wade's father Stephen handed over a mobile phone to the police with a recording of all his son's confessions. Forensic analysis found traces of DNA and fingerprints of Wilson on Christine Melton's body. Blood stains and personal items of both Christine and Diana Ruiz were found in the salon of the Nissan Versa. The phone history of both deceased women also indicated calls from Wilson on the day of the murders. The totality of the evidence left no doubt about the detainee's guilt, despite his attempts to deny everything. Investigators diligently gathered testimonies that revealed the full depth of Wilson's moral degradation. His ex-girlfriends told about the abuse and beatings he inflicted with maniacal regularity. Wilson himself arrogantly boasted of his misdeeds and threatened to continue killing if he escaped. The police even prevented another attempt Wilson's cellmate asked him to organize the murder of the mother of his child to avoid punishment for domestic violence. In letters to journalists from prison, Wilson rambled about a conspiracy against him and people who will not return. To one woman whose home he had once broken into, the criminal even sent threats from behind bars. He shamelessly traded interviews, promising to reveal some secrets, but all his stories turned out to be delusions. Overall, Wilson's behavior testified to deep corruption and self-centeredness. He was not at all concerned about the fate of his victims or close ones, only caring about his own skin. The trial of Wade Wilson lasted intermittently for 5 years. Sessions were postponed due to COVID restrictions, changes in the defendant's lawyers, or even the death of one of them. Wilson continuously received refusals on absurd petitions for bail or dismissal of the case. The audacious murderer even tried to escape from prison through a window with a fellow inmate. During this time, Wilson managed to make numerous tattoos on his face. The defense requested permission to hide these decorations with makeup so as not to shock the jurors, but the client proudly refused to do so. Finally, in June 2024, the selection of jurors began and the hearings commenced. In the dock sat 30-year-old Wade Wilson, not at all resembling the confident macho from the bars. His face was covered with sinister tattoos, his eyes darted around, and his lips twisted in inappropriate smiles. His entire appearance emitted something wild and untamed. Prosecutors convincingly proved Wilson's malicious intent and his guilt in 2 premeditated murders, assault and car theft. Particularly striking to the jurors were the confessions of the defendant in the strangulation of the sleeping Christine and the bloody descriptions of the execution of Diana. The defense vainly tried to justify Wilson's atrocities with drug intoxication. The evidence was too eloquent. During the hearings, relatives and friends of the murdered women talked about their grief and pain from the loss. Diana's fiancé sobbed, recalling the last message from his beloved about how much she loved him. The son of the victim stuttered and trembled while giving testimony, so traumatized by his mother's death. Christine's friend Stephanie bitterly regretted trusting her friend to a merciless killer. Christine's relatives mourned the incredible girl who was their support and favorite aunt for the children. Wade's ex-girlfriend Melissa openly called him a serial killer with empty eyes. Prosecutors emphasized that Wilson killed for the sake of killing, savoring the victim's pre-death torments. According to them, the crimes were the pinnacle of cynical disdain for life and a manifestation of deep hatred for women. This was indicated by his boasting of the executions, detailed descriptions of the agony of the strangled, and abuse of the mutilated bodies. The accusers convinced that Wilson would continue to kill if not stopped. In contrast, the defense attorneys argued that the defendant was a mentally ill drug addict, incapable of being responsible for his actions. They requested that Wilson be found guilty of only involuntary manslaughter of the second degree and given a chance for rehabilitation. The defendant himself refused to testify or apologize to the families of the victims. After 10 hours of deliberation, the jury announced guilty on all counts, including 2 premeditated murders. Cries erupted in the courtroom. Relatives of Christine and Diana embraced, rejoicing in the long-awaited justice. Only Wilson stood impassively, though tears treacherously shimmered in his eyes. He faced the harshest punishment, the death penalty. Indeed, a week after the verdict, the jury gathered to determine the fate of the killer. This time, the session was brief. The majority of jurors agreed that Wade Wilson deserved the highest measure. According to new laws, the decision did not have to be unanimous. 8 out of 12 votes were enough. The judge only had to approve this verdict, and Wilson awaited a lethal injection. The deaths of Christine Melton and Diana Ruiz at the hands of Wade Wilson were a real shock to their relatives and the entire community of Cape Coral. The senseless and brutal death of 2 bright women, mothers, friends, colleagues took a piece of soul from everyone who knew and loved them. Flourishing lives were cut short in an instant, leaving behind indescribable pain and emptiness. Stephanie, Christine's best friend, could not forgive herself for bringing a psychopathic killer into their circle. She constantly thought, what if she had acted differently that fateful night? Could she have saved Christine by being more cautious? These pangs of conscience tormented the girl every day, overshadowing the bright memories of their friendship. Christine's relatives' mother, brother, sister did not even have a chance to say goodbye to her until they identified the mutilated body in the morgue. They pleaded with the heavens for a miracle, hoping that some mistake had occurred. But the terrible truth soon confirmed. Christine was no more. She had died a horrific death at the hands of a monster she had imprudently trusted. Their lives were split into before and after, and their hearts were forever filled with sorrow, anger, and emptiness. An even worse fate befell Diana Ruiz's close ones. For 4 days, they did not know whether their beloved mother, daughter, fiancée, sister was alive. They called hospitals, morgues, police stations hundreds of times, hoping for a miracle. But when hope faded, they had to come to terms with the worst. Diana had died a martyr's death at the hands of a fiend. Diana's fiancé nearly went mad with grief. He blamed himself for not driving his beloved to work that tragic morning. Now the man could only visit her grave daily and weep bitterly, remembering their happy moments. Diana's son could hardly speak about his mother. Every word was an incredible effort. Each memory reopened the wound in his heart. The only consolation for the grieving families was that the murderer of their loved ones would suffer the severest punishment. It would not bring back the deceased, but at least it would quench the thirst for justice and protect others from the fate of Wilson's victims. The court's verdict, life imprisonment or execution, was some satisfaction for their suffering. For Melissa Montanez, the end of this story was also bittersweet. She barely escaped becoming the 3rd victim of her insane ex-lover and still could not comprehend how he so masterfully pretended to be an innocent lamb. The girl shuddered at the thought of what would have happened if she had believed his sweet promises and given him another chance. Would she have ended up in a suitcase with her throat slit? Only now did Melissa realize what a predator she had been involved with, and she was glad that she finally escaped his clutches, although the emotional scars would remind her of this painful experience for a long time. Inventive Father Wade, Stephen, also received his share of moral torment.
Despite all his love for his son, he realized that he had done the right thing by turning him into the police. Otherwise, Wilson Jr. would have continued killing innocents until a bullet stopped him. Yet, despite the pangs of conscience, Stephen blamed himself for not being able to raise Wade as a decent person. Although perhaps such monsters are born with a black soul, and no efforts can cleanse it. at least while justice caught up with Wilson as he deserved. When the jury delivered the verdict about the death penalty, the courtroom erupted in loud applause. Even the judge barely restrained a smile while reading the verdict, and only the murderer himself remained unmoved, as if he still did not feel guilty for his bloody deeds. However, some believed that life imprisonment among criminals would have been an even worse punishment for him than a quick death from an injection. The terrible story of Wade Wilson, Christine Melton, and Diana Ruiz is a warning to all of us. A warning that evil can hide behind an attractive mask, pretend to be a friend and lover. That impulse control and toxic masculinity combined with drugs are a ticking time bomb. That indifference to violence and the objectification of women can lead to a bloody tragedy. Perhaps if someone had stopped Wade during his first attacks on girlfriends, Diana and Christine would be alive. If law enforcement had responded more harshly to his beatings of exes, the next victims would not have joined the list. If we all were more attentive to signs of hidden aggression in the behavior of loved ones, we would more often prevent misfortune. Of course, some will say that maniacs like Wilson are simply incurably sick and dangerous, that no psychotherapy, medications, or upbringing will curb their thirst for blood. But isn't it worth at least trying to tame the demons inside a person with therapy and compassion before handing her over to the executioner? After all, every criminal is someone's child, and someone will cry for them just as the families of Christine and Diana. This, of course, does not absolve Wilson of guilt and does not make him a victim of circumstances. He was fully aware of his actions and boasted of them, considering himself above morality. Such inhumans indeed do not deserve to live in a society they despise. But shouldn't more effort be made to stop them before they become monsters? Perhaps then Christine, Diana, and hundreds of other victims would have lived to see gray hair in the family circle. This tragedy cannot be undone, but it must teach us something. Be more cautious when meeting strangers. Pay attention to alarming changes in the behavior of loved ones. What you're about to hear will make you shudder. Imagine police officers weeping in horror at what they've seen. Imagine a family where members die one after another under mysterious circumstances. No, this isn't the plot of a mystical thriller. This is a real story that happened to an incredibly charming girl. Daisy Coleman, a young beauty, seemed to have everything one could dream of: a kind heart, a sharp mind, and numerous talents. However, behind the appearance of this charming girl hid a tormented soul that had to endure terrible events at an early age. Daisy was born in the small town of Albany, Missouri, on March 30th, 1997. Her father, Michael, worked as a doctor, and her mother, Melinda, was a veterinarian. Daisy was raised in the Coleman family along with her 3 biological brothers, being the second child. Tragedy struck the family in 2009 when Michael, Daisy, and one of her younger brothers were traveling to a neighboring town for a wrestling competition. During this trip, their car collided with an obstacle on the road and flew into a ditch. Sadly, as a result of this terrible accident, the head of the family died. After losing her father, the Coleman family moved to the larger city of Maryville, also in Missouri. Melinda single-handedly raised her 3 sons and daughter, and although it wasn't easy, she managed her responsibilities. At that time, no one in the Coleman family, who had already experienced a horrific loss, could even imagine the curse that awaited them in the future. Early in the morning of January 8, 2012, 14-year-old Daisy Coleman regained consciousness in the yard of her own house. Outside, there was a bone-chilling cold, with temperatures reaching 0. Daisy was lying on the snow, her hair frozen to the ground. The girl was wearing only a t-shirt and sweatpants. At that moment, the first thought that flashed through Daisy's mind was, "I must be dead." She couldn't get up or call for help. Her speech was slurred and confused. Daisy was crying. With great difficulty, the girl managed to crawl to the front door of the house and bang on it with all her might. The clock showed 5, and it was a real miracle that Daisy's mother, Melinda, who was sleeping in her room, heard a strange knocking at the door through her sleep. At first, she thought it was their dogs that had gotten cold outside and were trying to get into the house. The woman threw on a robe and headed for the front door to let the animals into the warm home. When Melinda opened the door, she saw her daughter Daisy on the threshold. The girl was lying on the cold steps, almost unconscious. She reeked heavily of alcohol, unable to speak, only crying. The mother instantly screamed, calling for her sons to help. The boys woke up, quickly ran downstairs, and carried the frozen Daisy into the house. The whole family was terrified. At first, they tried to warm the girl with blankets, but the mother, upon closely examining her daughter, realized that her legs were most likely severely frostbitten. so the mother filled the bathtub with water and asked her sons to take Daisy to the bathroom, leave her there, and go out. The girl was still unconscious. The mother herself began to undress her daughter and saw huge bruises and red marks on her legs. It was only at this moment that the woman realized something terrible had happened to her beloved Daisy. The mother gently immersed Daisy in a bathtub with cool water. As a veterinarian, she knew well how to provide first aid for frostbite. The woman gradually increased the water temperature in the bathtub, thus slowly warming her daughter's body. Fortunately, she managed to help Daisy. Soon the girl warmed up, but her speech remained unclear and confused. It was difficult for Daisy to speak, so the alarmed Melinda called 911 and summoned the police. When the police officers arrived at the scene, they immediately began examining Daisy. However, the girl was still under the influence of alcohol, and her mind was clouded, so she couldn't clearly recount the events of the previous night. Under these circumstances, the police had to turn to Daisy's friend, Paige, who was also at the Coleman family's house that night and slept in the same room as Daisy. Paige shared her version of the events with the officers. As her friend recounted, on Saturday, January 7th, 2012, Daisy invited her best friend Paige to her house for a sleepover. In the evening, the girls decided to watch a few horror movies, and for a greater effect, drank strong alcoholic beverages that they had secretly stolen from the Coleman family's home bar. Closer to midnight, Daisy began exchanging messages with her older brother's friend, 17-year-old Matthew Bonnet, who was the star of the school football team. Upon learning that Daisy was spending the night with a friend, Matthew sent the girls a message proposing they have fun at his place.
Daisy and Paige enthusiastically agreed to this adventure and arranged to meet with Matthew and his friends. Around 1 o'clock in the morning on January 8th, the girlfriends snuck out of Daisy's house through her bedroom window and ran around the corner, where Matthew and 4 of his friends were already waiting for them. The boys escorted the girls to Matthew's house, helped them get through the window into the basement, and asked them to be quiet so as not to wake up Barnett's parents, who were sleeping upstairs. According to Paige, as soon as she and Daisy found themselves in the basement, Matthew immediately began treating Daisy to alcohol. Paige sat nearby and watched as her friend drank one glass after another, almost without stopping. At some point, one of the boys, named Nicholas, approached Paige, took her hand, and led her to a neighboring empty room in the basement. There, at the young man's initiative, they had sexual intercourse. Meanwhile, Matthew and Daisy went to another room where there was a large bed. Several times, when the door opened, Paige was able to see what was happening in that room with Daisy. The girl was lying on the bed, barely conscious, unable to speak or move. Matthew took advantage of her helpless state and engaged in sexual intercourse with Daisy. His friend Jordan Zetch filmed everything that was happening on his smartphone camera. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the boys decided it was time to go home. They put the girls in the car and drove them to the Coleman family's house. Paige got out of the car first. Matthew told her that Daisy should sit outside in the fresh air to sober up. The boys assured that they would stay with Daisy and take care of her safety outside. They advised Paige to go home and go to bed. The friend believed their words and agreed to go alone. Paige got to the house, climbed through the window into Daisy's bedroom, fell on the bed, and instantly fell asleep. At this time, the boys pulled Daisy out of the car, set her on her feet, and supported her so she wouldn't fall. The girl got sick, so they took off her shoes, took her purse and cell phone, and held her hair while she vomited. Then they gently laid Daisy on the cold ground near the house. Fearing that they might be noticed and not wanting to take risks, the young men quickly got into the car and drove away. Daisy lay outside for about 3 hours in the bitter cold at 0 temperature. She was wearing only a t-shirt and sweatpants, without socks or shoes. Her hair was wet and frozen. Arriving at the scene on a call, the police officers thoroughly examined the Coleman family's house and the surrounding area. In Daisy's room, they came across 5 empty plastic bottles of alcoholic beverages. In the yard, they found Daisy's bag, her cell phone, shoes, and traces of vomit. That same morning, the victim was taken to the hospital for a medical examination. During the examination, numerous bruises on her legs and tears in the groin area were recorded on Daisy's body. The girl had several tests taken, one of which showed that the alcohol level in her blood was almost twice the maximum allowable limit. After a few hours in the hospital, Daisy finally regained consciousness. She reported that she did not remember any details of the previous night. The girl could not reproduce the details of what happened and admitted that she had drunk too much alcohol. However, Daisy did not deny the fact that she had taken alcoholic beverages from the home bar without her mother's permission and secretly ran away at night to the company of boys. Around 11 a.m. on January 8th, a few hours after the incident, law enforcement officers located Matthew Barnett, Jordan Zech, and Nicholas Graumaudis. They were charged and all three were taken to the police station for interrogation. During questioning, Matthew Barnett did not deny having intimate relations with Daisy Coleman that night. However, he insisted that everything happened by mutual consent. The boy said that when he met Daisy and her friend Paige, the girls were already intoxicated. At first, Matthew denied treating Daisy to alcohol, but the more he spoke, the more entangled he became in his own testimony. Eventually, he did confess to treating Daisy to a few shots of strong drinks to melt her icy heart. Matthew reported that during intercourse, he used a condom, which he threw away on the way back to Daisy's house. Another person involved in the case, Jordan Zech, initially refused to testify but later admitted to using his friend Nicholas' smartphone to record a video of Matthew kissing Daisy. The video lasted about 10 seconds. Jordan managed to show this video to his friends, but then, getting scared, deleted it. Nicholas, who had sexual intercourse with Daisy's friend Paige, was the only one who immediately fully admitted his guilt. He was sent to a juvenile detention center. Matthew's friend, who drove the boys and girls in his car to Daisy's house, said that throughout the ride, Daisy wouldn't stop crying, and Matthew expressed fears that the girl's brother Charlie would kill him if he found out what happened. At the same time, it became known that a few days before the terrible incident, Matthew had already visited the Colemans' home. That time, he had a peaceful dinner with the family at the same table in a friendly atmosphere. At 1 p.m. on January 8th, a search was conducted in the basement of Matthew Barnett's house. Police officers seized bed linen, several empty bottles, men's underwear, and plastic cups. During repeated interrogations, the sheriff's assistant, while talking to Matthew, was moved by the young man's story. At one point, the officer even suggested that girls often resort to such actions to attract attention, and it is quite possible that this case is one of those. The sheriff's assistant praised Matthew for taking care of the girl and driving her home. However, for some reason, the fact that the boy left Daisy alone to freeze on the street did not attract the officer's proper attention. Several days passed, and Daisy Coleman's health condition completely normalized. Her life was no longer in danger. However, the girl still could not recall any new details of that terrible night. 2 months later, in March 2012, all charges against Matthew Barnett and Jordan Zech were completely dropped. The district attorney concluded that the intimate relationship between the young people occurred by mutual consent. The video recording that Jordan made that night could not be restored after deletion, although several of Jordan's classmates claimed they saw footage of Matthew kissing Daisy. During the analysis of the couple's smartphones, the investigation found out that Matthew and Daisy maintained telephone communication about once a month. In text messages, Daisy hinted to Matthew that she was ready to have sexual intercourse with him in exchange for a bottle of strong alcohol. In addition, correspondence was found dating back to before January 8th, in which Daisy and Matthew exchanged explicit messages of a sexual nature. After Matthew's release from custody, it became known that he was the grandson of an influential political figure, Rex Barnett, who had previously been a member of the state legislative assembly. Rex Barnett was a member of the Committee on Criminal Law and Public Safety. He had close ties with many prosecutors and police officers throughout the state of Missouri. Matthew and Jordan were released, and the boys returned to their normal lives. At the same time, Daisy Coleman hoped that the hype surrounding her nightly adventure would finally subside. The girl continued her education, but instead of support from her peers, she faced open hostility and ridicule. Most of her acquaintances sided with Matthew, and Daisy began to be called a liar and a slut. She instantly turned into an outcast, withdrew into herself, and tried to spend as much time as possible at home alone. Daisy, who had previously led an active social and public life, was involved in sports and dancing, now simply disappeared from sight. Moreover, the girl was forced to leave the school cheerleading squad. Daisy's mother, Melinda, began receiving anonymous threats daily, both at home and at work. Soon, the woman was asked to quit her job at the veterinary clinic, where she had worked for many years. After that, the Coleman family realized that they could no longer stay in the town of Maryville and decided to move to another place. In the spring of 2013, their empty house in Maryville, put up for sale, burned to the ground. The police never managed to establish the cause of the fire. There were rumors that Matthew Barnett's father was involved. Some time later, under extremely mysterious circumstances, the house of Daisy's friend named Paige also burned down. By that time, the girls had already stopped communicating. By the way, Paige also became an outcast at school. It is known that the girl suffered from nightmares for a long time. As time passed, Daisy's story attracted the attention of the media. The girl began receiving active support from people across the country, especially those who had experienced similar traumatic experiences. Thanks to this, Daisy managed to reopen the case against her main offender, Matthew Barnett. The case went to trial, but the boy was found guilty only of leaving Daisy alone in the cold in the middle of the night. Matthew Barnett was sentenced to 2 years of probation and ordered to pay the Coleman family $2,800 in compensation. The other defendants in the case avoided any charges. Daisy Coleman continued to live her life, but regularly encountered not only words of support, but also threats from anonymous users on the internet. She understood how unfairly people behaved. Daisy took every negative message addressed to her very painfully. In 2016, when 19-year-old Daisy was studying in college, a documentary film titled Audrey and Daisy was released on the Netflix streaming service. The film told the story of violence, bullying, harassment on social networks, and the detrimental consequences this can lead to in the future. Daisy became one of the main characters of the film and shared her story. However, the fate of the second heroine, Audrey Pott from California, turned out to be even more tragic. Almost the same thing happened to Audrey as to Daisy Coleman in 2012. But unlike Daisy, Audrey was unable to cope morally with what happened. The girl's photos quickly spread across the network. Both Audrey's friends and enemies saw them. The last post she left on her social media page contained the following words: "My life is ruined. The whole school knows. I will never get rid of this reputation. Everyone knows how bad I am. I want it all to end." 9 days later, Audrey took her own life. She could not withstand the humiliation that fell upon her from all sides. Audrey's parents were able to initiate a criminal case only 6 months after their daughter's death. The perpetrators, 3 boys, were sentenced to terms ranging from 30 to 45 days. Later, their families paid Audrey's parents about $1 million in moral compensation. Let's return to Daisy Coleman. In 2018, seeking to start life with a clean slate, the girl moved to the state of Colorado, where she got a job at a tattoo parlor. At the same time, she worked on creating a second film project, which focused on the process of her own recovery. However, in June 2018, Daisy faced another shock. Her mother Melinda and brother Tristan got into a car accident while driving to Daisy from their hometown. As a result of the accident, 19-year-old Tristan died. The circumstances of this tragedy remain unknown to this day. After losing her brother, Daisy published a post on social media in which she admitted that every day it became more and more difficult for her to keep her inner demons under control, to put on a smile, and to pretend that everything was fine. After Tristan's death, Daisy co-founded a charitable organization that supported victims of violence. She continued to share her personal tragedy and provide support to other people who found themselves in similar situations. In her publications, Daisy repeatedly talked about how sometimes it was difficult for her to cope with the thoughts swirling in her head. She struggled with emotional pain, panic attacks, and constant terrible memories. In the summer of 2020, 23-year-old Daisy Coleman began sharing disturbing details with her friends. She was being stalked by an unknown man who constantly sent her threats. The girl went to the police and filed a statement that a stranger had been following her since December 2019. Daisy desperately pleaded for help, but her pleas went unanswered. On Tuesday, August 4th, 2020, she published a tweet in which she admitted that she was afraid to leave the house. Daisy wrote that she couldn't even walk her dog or go to work because of the overwhelming fear. She also reported that she had lost her appetite and couldn't sleep. A few hours later, a new post from Daisy appeared on Facebook. She said that some man had approached her house and knocked on the door. The girl confessed that she was very scared. She suggested that this man might have previously stolen her keys, and now it would not be difficult for him to get into her home. In addition, Daisy reported that the unknown man had stolen her photos and registered on one of the sites, where he offered intimate services for money on her behalf. Melinda, Daisy's mother, upon stumbling upon her daughter's message on social media, immediately called the Colorado police asking them to check on the girl. At 4 p.m., officers arrived at Daisy's home. She let them into the house, and the police spent about an hour with her. The girl again told them about being stalked by an unknown man. The officers did not notice anything suspicious in Daisy's behavior. But shortly after the law enforcement officers left, 23-year-old Daisy Coleman contacted her boyfriend via video call. During the conversation, she suddenly took out a gun. pointed it at herself, and pulled the trigger. Her boyfriend did not immediately realize what had happened. The connection was cut off. Daisy stopped answering calls. Frightened, the young man dialed 911. When the police officers arrived at Daisy Coleman's house again at 8 p.m., they found the girl already dead. One of the police officers couldn't hold back and burst into tears at the sight. The girl had a fatal gunshot wound. She was lying in a pool of blood. Melinda, Daisy's mother, reported her daughter's death in a post on her social media page. She wrote, "Daisy was my best friend and a wonderful daughter. How I wish I could take her pain away. She never recovered from what those boys did to her back in school. It's just not fair. My girl is gone from us." The woman said that she had fought for Daisy and her mental health for many years. She believed that she had done everything possible for her beloved daughter. The mother also confirmed that in recent months, Daisy was indeed being stalked, and just recently, the girl found out that she would never be able to have children. After Daisy's death, the tattoo parlor where she worked was robbed. The perpetrator stole an album with Daisy's exclusive sketches and her tattoo machine. 4 months passed. In December 2020, 58-year-old Melinda Coleman published another heartfelt post on social media dedicated to her beloved daughter. And soon after, the woman took a gun in her hands and did the same as Daisy. Only 2 sons remained in the Coleman family, the older Charlie and the younger Logan. The charitable organization founded by Daisy organized a fundraiser to support the boys. It became known that Matthew Barnett's life and career were going well. After the death of Daisy and her mother Melinda, he expressed words of sympathy about the tragedy that befell the Coleman family. "I hope that Daisy's story will be the impetus for change in our society. We must create a world in which no child will suffer from violence, where every voice will be heard, and every victim will receive support and justice. Thank you for being with me and listening to this difficult story. I love each and every one of you. May the memory of Daisy Coleman forever remain in our hearts as a reminder that love, compassion, and support are what make us human. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.